Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. Today we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 16. We're going to look at verses 13 through 15. Now, we spent the last few days in chapter 16 because Moses has given instructions for what are to be the 3 pilgrim festivals that Israel is to observe once they are into the promised land. The pilgrim festivals are the ones where they are, if at all possible, required to travel to the central place of worship, where the tabernacle would be, later the temple, and there to observe these festivals. We've already looked at the Passover and the Festival of Weeks, also called Pentecost. And today we're looking at the Festival of Tabernacles. The Festival of Tabernacles. So that's in verses 13 through 15 of chapter 16. Celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Be joyful at your festival. Your sons, your daughters, you, your male and female servants, the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, the widows, all who live in your towns. For 7 days, celebrate the festival to the Lord your God at the place the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless you in all of your harvest and in all the work of your hands. Your joy will be complete. Now, the Festival of Tabernacles occurs in the fall. It occurs at the time of the fall harvest. They are to celebrate it for 7 days. Now, it's called tabernacles because they are to construct for themselves tabernacles, sometimes called booths, little tents. This is to remind them of the 40 years they spent wandering in the wilderness when they lived in temporary tabernacles or booths that could be taken down and moved. For 7 days, they are to live in the tabernacles, remembering how God brought them through the wilderness and then brought them into the promised land. Now notice the Festival of Tabernacles is to last for 7 days, and it is to be a celebration that everyone engages in. Everyone, even foreigners who reside among them, are to participate in this great festival. Also notice it is a festival of great joy. They are to rejoice in the Lord, and their joy will be complete. So oftentimes we think of these festivals as very solemn and somber occasions, and we miss the underlying emphasis. They are times of great joy and rejoicing in all that God has done for them. And this was especially true of the Festival of Tabernacles, where they remembered how God brought them through the wilderness and has brought them into the promised land. And they are rejoicing in all that God has done for them. So as I said, this festival would be in the fall, and it would be a great time to celebrate and rejoice in who they were as the people of God. So in chapter 16, we have seen the 3 pilgrim festivals mentioned, those 3 times when they would travel to the central place of worship. In the spring, they would go for Passover. In the early summer, they would go for the Festival of Weeks. And then in the fall, they would go for the Festival of Tabernacles, always remembering that they were the redeemed people of God, that God had blessed them, and they would always find joy in their worship of God. Now, when you get to the end of the chapter, there's an interesting comment. It mentions idolatry again, which is interesting because I've just been talking about these worship festivals to the Lord. But in verse 21 and 22, the chapter concludes by saying, "Do not set up any wooden Asherah pole beside the altar you built to the Lord your God. Do not erect a sacred stone, for these the Lord your God hates." Now, these were the things that the Canaanites did. They set up Asherah poles. Asherah was a goddess that was worshipped by Canaan. They set up sacred stones to worship the Canaanite gods. This would be a temptation to Israel. So again, the Lord is reminding them, do not worship the gods of the Canaanites. Do not worship their idols or their false gods. Do not intermingle with them. Now, the fact that it's placed here, this reminder, right after all the instructions on the festivals, is an indication to us that one of the reasons you have these moments of worship is to keep your heart true to God. The festivals are to remind you that only the Lord is your God. Only the Lord. He only will you serve. He only will you worship. You are to remember by these festivals, these 3 times a year when you go to the place of worship and give joy or celebrate joy before the Lord for all he's done for you, you are reminding yourself that the Lord, he alone is God. This keeps you from the temptation of idolatry. So if you'll keep worshiping, keep your heart true to God, keep going to the festivals, Israel, you'll always remember who the Lord is. You'll not be tempted to worship these idols of the Canaanites. That's why we go to church too. It reminds us, keeps always in our minds, keep worshiping the Lord, keep your heart true, keep remembering who God is, and don't be tempted to follow the idols of our society. So the festivals were very important for Israel to keep their hearts true to God, just as our worship times are very important to us to keep our hearts true to God. Hope you join us tomorrow for our next session in our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy.